Yeah.
Time is all yours.
All right. Thank you, Ashmi, and also thank you for the opportunity to present our work on multi-stakeholder recommenders here in this session and in front of this audience. So for those of you who don't know, my co-authors and myself, we are in media and communication sciences. So I figured I could take this opportunity to also introduce you a bit to our approach to studying recommender systems and how I think this could perhaps complement with the work that is mostly happening in this community. So in our field, we are actually interested in studying recommender systems because we have a long tradition of studying gatekeeping in media. And very brief, gatekeeping is actually the process of deciding what information reaches large audiences. And that's not at all a straightforward process because there are many reasons to decide what information actually gets to the audience. And in the early 90s, Nicholas Garnham, a famous communication scholar, actually defined the news industry or the media industry in general as an hourglass structure. So with only very few actors having this gatekeeping power. I think about mass media like broadcasters or news publishers. And sometimes I wish I was a communication scholar back then, because ever since the media landscape started to look like this, gatekeeping power is distributed across a lot of actors due to the internet and the platformization. So it's a very complex process with news not only be distributed by professional news outlets, but also on social media, for example. And not only that, it is also no longer a merely human activity. We talk about recommender systems, so we talk about algorithms and automations. So to us, that actually means that parts of these processes are becoming black boxes. So we talk about the algorithmic opacity that makes it actually very difficult to study these practices and to understand what factors are actually influencing these decisions. But we are courageous scholars, so we didn't give up on studying algorithmic gatekeeping. And in the last decade, I would say that actually we mainly studied what recommenders recommend. So we looked at which users get exposed to which kind of content. We looked at diversity, how diverse are the recommendations. So we mainly looked at the output of recommender systems. And I think that has been already a very interesting field of work, and I am also assuming that we will continue to do so. But in this paper, we actually proposed a second way of looking and studying at recommender systems. So not by asking the question, what do they recommend, but why do they recommend? So we basically shift our focus to the other side of the recommender system where human actors take decisions on what this recommender should do. What are their motivations? What are their reasons? What incentivizes them to decide what this recommender should do? And I think that's a very interesting perspective. I might be a bit biased, but I think it's really interesting because it actually opens up a lot of opportunities to rephrase some of the questions that we have been asking. For example, instead of asking how much diversity is there, we can ask a question, why do they want diversity in the system? Why would a news organization be motivated to design for serendipitous news discovery, for example? So a lot of new questions arise, and I think it's I mean, as I will show, it opens a lot of new avenues for research. So, of course, if you think about it that way, it actually resonates with some of the work that has been developed in the recommender systems community, which is that of multi-stakeholder recommendation. And I very briefly summarized these ideas here. So it's about acknowledging that there are actually multiple stakeholders that have their own purposes and ideas about what a good recommendation is, what recommenders should do. So this is more the strategic perspective, which then eventually gets translated in a more unified operational perspective, which is actually about the actual code and all the technical things that most of you guys are doing here. So when we encountered this earlier work, to us it was a very compelling idea because it resonates a lot with very traditional questions and approaches that we have been asking for a very long time, and also about more traditional gatekeepers. So we wanted to apply this and see how it could help us in answering our research questions. So we applied this to news publishers. So we wanted to understand, okay, in the context of news, who are actually these stakeholders? How do the processes work? How do we go from strategic perspectives to operational implementations? What does this mean in practice? So we talked to a lot of people. That's what we do. We did this study in Flanders, so the Dutch-speaking part of Belgium. We talked to two commercial or employees at two commercial news or media companies and the public broadcaster. In Flanders, we have a very concentrated market, so we basically covered all the news outlets that are out there. And I think we had a lot of very interesting insights, which are largely and very much in-depth explained in the paper. In this presentation, I would like to focus on two examples, two key insights that can give you a brief idea on what it actually is that you can find in the paper. So the first thing that I want to focus upon is on the purposes of a news recommender. So why do they actually use a news recommender in these companies? And the second one is about stakeholder involvement. So why do they use news recommenders? What do news companies think that actually a recommender can do for their own strategic goals? This first one actually relates to a bit of the state of the industry. So maybe, as most of you probably know, the news publishers market is kind of under pressure. Advertising revenues are decreasing. Users are increasingly avoiding news, so it's very challenging. And this use case is actually was told by one of our commercial companies. So they actually wanted to, in general, news publishers want to shift to more subscriptions because advertise-based revenue models are under pressure. So they really want to focus on subscriptions. And this company also wanted to have more subscriptions, and therefore they decided to actually increase the amount of paid articles on their homepage, hoping that people would subscribe more. And yes, that happened. So they did see an increase in subscriptions, but this was at the cost of advertising revenues, which of course makes sense because there were fewer free articles to be shown. So this is of course not really a valuable or a viable business case. But then they thought, we have this recommender system, maybe we can do something with that. So instead of shifting the distribution of the articles, they sticked to the original distribution of more free articles and a few paywalled articles, but they used the recommender system to actually optimize the paywalled articles that were shown to the individual users. And this was actually a successful case because they were able to have stable advertising revenues, but increase their subscription revenues. So this might be a quite straightforward example, but I think it nicely shows how a recommender systems can be used to align with strategic objectives and maybe sometimes even resolve conflicting KPIs. The second thing that I want to point out is about stakeholder involvement. I think I don't have to convince you that there are indeed a lot of stakeholders involved when it's about news recommenders. So it's journalists, editors, marketeers, salespersons, developers, also society has a stake. So there are a lot of stakes. And we noticed, but it wouldn't surprise you, that actually not everyone has a seat at the table. When it comes down to deciding, okay, this is what a recommender will do, there are only a few of these stakeholders represented, and some of them are indirectly represented by, for example, the product manager who tries to align all these needs. Now, that is not necessarily a problem, because that's how it goes in any design. Your stakeholders are represented in some way. But what was very striking to us, and I think we should emphasize that also more, is that different stakeholders actually had big misunderstandings and misbeliefs about each other. For example, journalists really had, or at least some of them really had, a very bad understanding about what a recommender can and cannot do. And this impacted their beliefs and their attitudes towards using this system. And I see some of you nodding, but I'm sorry to tell you that on the engineering side and the developers, there we also noticed that some of them had no clue how the day of a journalist looked like, what it actually takes to make news. And it's more than just relevance. So there are clearly some gaps between these different stakeholders, and we think it's really interesting to look for ways to align them a bit more. This could be tools, but this could also be in terms of what kind of people do we need in organizations to align all these stakeholders and to make sure that they have like a common understanding, because we really think that this can make or break the implementation of a recommender system. So this and much more we all summed up in the article, which you can read by scanning the QR code. We also reframed a bit or refocused a bit the multi-stakeholder framework. We didn't stop after publishing this paper. We now have a larger team working on these challenges, and I hope that our findings can also again contribute to this community. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Annelien, for the presentation. Do we have questions? You can either use the microphone there, or you can use the Slido.
Thanks for the paper and the work you're doing on this topic. Did you, so you talked there about recommendations sort of delivered on the newspaper's own site. Did you also talk to your subjects about sort of news aggregation and the way their stories might appear, in places where they don't have control or that aren't inside of the publisher?
Yeah, no, in this stage we didn't, and that's also why I wanted to mention that it's about the news publishers and not about the news aggregators, but indeed they also, their own website and their own product is what they can control, but of course how the life it lives on social media, etc. It's a different challenge, but it's not something that we focused on. But it's a very interesting and important question as well, I think.
Thank you very much for the question, and thank you once again, Annelien, and congratulations.
Thank you.
So.